tape that Ken had made, a digital tape of a super pod in the middle of the night with no other noises at all, just at that point almost 100 JK and L whales in Harrow Strait having a great time. Just chatter, chatter, chatter. And Dateline NBC played it for Lolita, and that was her response. So then in September '97, I went to Miami, sponsored at first by the Progressive Animal Welfare Society, and I ended up staying 2 years to try to just generate more public opinion that Lolita should go home, that she shouldn't be there. I brought all the science and presented it everywhere, and did demonstrations and more demonstrations, and was able to get some pretty reasonable crowds out on the sidewalk in front of this aquarium, and got some just beautiful little letters from adorable little girls about Lolita, showing that someone's hearing this anyway, and that provided that's a lot of incentive to keep going. And did more demonstrations, and Ralph and Karen Monroe came to Miami to join us in our demonstrations, and we got good print media, the Miami Herald, and Miss Berta came down to Miami to join the protests, and Elton John joined the campaign for about a week. Somebody got to him and said, no, that's the entertainment industry you're going up against. So he backed out. Had more demonstrations, and even got in the Spanish language El Nuevo Herald. We got in some good press, the business section of the Miami Herald, New Times Magazine, Living La Vida Orca, and even the National Enquirer. We were at the supermarket, a full-page spread with a coupon to send to a senator in Florida. Things were looking up, it seemed, for a little while. But, what was the real effectiveness? Did it change the minds of the owners? Did it bring down revenues at the gate? I don't think so. We just really were no match still for the marketing power of the industry with their glow of credibility and scientific authority. So, you never know. I mean, seeds were planted, and things did happen that maybe appeared later on, years later. But at the time, it just, people would say, well, how's progress? Well, we had another demonstration, but, what did that do to Lolita? I don't know. Then in 1997, a great book was written, Spectacular Nature, that it was a UCLA sociologist who dissected SeaWorld really nicely on a table, just laid it out, and showed their entire marketing strategy, basically, and went into detail about how they have defined the experience of going to SeaWorld. They're not seeing, animals that are hurting in any way or any kind of, discomfort. They're happy there. And not only that, but they, again, described what the animals were. They were the ultimate voice that told the public what is a killer whale, according to their marketing strategies, which changed over the years. So it's a fascinating book. And also about that time, a book came out, a DVD came out, Lolita, Slave to Entertainment, which is great. It is still making waves around the world. So then in September '98, Keiko goes to Iceland and loves it. He swam around, he dove deeper, he built up his metabolic strength, and just he thrived in his native waters. Then he took his first ocean walk, and he met some friendly whales, but he didn't bond with them, he didn't stick with them at all. And then he went to Norway. And ABC in 2020, following the lead of the media in general, said it can't be done, it's too late, he's become habituated to humans and can never go back in the ocean, and that became what everybody believed, basically. And then in December 2003, Keiko died of pneumonia or whatever, and really that sort of ended all of that jubilation about we're going to free a whale finally, because although it did work in many ways. Keiko did thrive until he died. But the way that it was spun, of course, by the marketing machines of the industry was that not only was it a failure, but it was a crime. It was a terrible example, the worst case of animal abuse you can imagine, to put him back in the ocean. And that became the public's belief. And then this paper came out in 2001, and this was not addressing captivity at all. Of course, it was about wild whales, actually all whales, but in particular they talked about orcas, and it was based largely on the studies right here of the northern and southern resident orcas and the others. And in that, the authors conclude that orcas are capable of culture without parallel except in humans. That's a pretty bold statement, that they have culture that is like ours. And I could elaborate on that, and that's what I really love to talk about, so I could do that any time. But that set a new bar, and that was not intended to address captivity issues, but of course a lot of people read that, and that has, over the last 10 or 11 years, has filtered into the consciousness of a lot of people, which makes it even more atrocious that they are captured and taken away from their cultures and their families and put into tanks to do tricks. And then in 2007, this book came out, Dolphins Are Persons. This whole book, and he's still on a campaign to develop this idea, and it's sort of growing. He sort of formulated the thinking, the philosophical and moral thinking behind the idea that dolphins, including, of course, orcas, should be considered persons, not just wildlife, not just animals, but each one should be considered a person. And then another SeaWorld owner. This time it was InBev Beer Company, Stella Artois beer from Belgium, bought Budweiser and all of their parks, including SeaWorld. So they owned them all. But they didn't want the parks, they just wanted the beer. And I just had to throw this in because it's beautiful. I don't know if it really had much effect beyond a very small social network following, but it's a beautiful little, I think it's about a 12-minute DVD it's animated, that goes into Lolita's inner life, her memories, her dreams, her wishes, her traumas. It's just very beautifully done. It's not narrated, it's just depicted with music. It's just beautiful. And we got the occasional media, celebrities for Lolita and the News Times. And the media seems to mostly want to do the stories, but they have to have a story. They can't just make a statement. There has to be an event. There has to be something that they can hook onto and tell. And in that story, they're generally very, very good about, except for talking about Keiko a lot, but sort of helping with the idea that even captives should go home sometime. And then in 2007, Shelby Roy, who is out there somewhere, revived the Lolita campaign, did demos once a month and did all kinds of great stuff, and really brought it back to life, and has since moved to Olympia to pursue her studies on orcas. So the current SeaWorld owner is the Blackstone Investment Group, and this is the CEO. So just for a sort of exercise in empathy, imagine he's here today watching the rest of this show as you see what happens next to his brand new company that he just bought at the end of 2009, finalized it in November. And in 2009 also the Cove came out, which has a big message about captivity, as many of you I'm sure know. And then in December 2009, in Laurel Parque, which is in Spain, on the Canary Islands, owned by Spain, a marine circus there, one of the young males killed a trainer, Alexis Martinez. He's there with John Grant's show. who was sent there to train the trainers, being a senior trainer at SeaWorld. And then, exactly 2 months later, Tillicum killed Don Bradshaw. This time, everybody heard about it. This made waves. This was the event that brought out the media that had been dormant for many, many years. You know, the people who think about it, and the writers, a lot of the media, they probably got it, that it looked like it when that happened, that suddenly they were telling the story, basically saying, should they be in captivity at all in the first place? That was pretty much the bottom line of the coverage of Don Branshaw's death. And where it says the camera rolls seconds before the attack, actually it was about a second after. He already has her by the arm. If you look at the footage, it's pretty hard to watch, but she's being dragged in. And then the tourists who took these didn't know that that was happening and panned away. So it doesn't show the splash into the water. But what that did was it energized a lot of people. Much to my amazement, I got a call from CNN the day that Don Bradshaw was killed. So I said what I knew, which wasn't much, and I referred them to Jeff Ventry, who I had met because he came out to visit the whales and get familiar with the research out here. I didn't know what he would do. He's never been hadn't at that point ever been in captivity, but I knew he'd be honest and he wouldn't just give the SeaWorld spin, and he would have some interesting information about the inside of SeaWorld. Well, and then the next day, actually, we took off for Baja, California, and went completely out of touch with the world for a week. And when we got back, we found out that Jeff had not only gone on CNN and CBS and all kinds of other media, but he had recruited several other ex-trainers to also back him up and do media. And they did. And then in April 2010, the first time ever that Congress addressed the issue of, do these marine parks actually educate anybody? Are they of any real value to people? And, you know, of course, both sides were presented, but it was the first time that there was any kind of congressional record for any discussion about it. So that was great, and certainly in the headlines and right there in Orlando, Congress scheduled hearing on marine mammals in captivity. And about that time, The Whale came out, which was a remake of Luna, which is really all about Luna, that adorable, wonderful little personality, but has some overtones about captivity, and the producers that go around with the movie and introduce it have a lot to say about captivity, so that sort of helps move the bar a little bit. And then June 10, 2010, a whale dies at SeaWorld, Taima, in birth, during a stillbirth. The mom and calf died. And then a little later, June 23rd, 2010, Morgan, a little whale, is found in the Netherlands and is rescued legitimately and brought to a park, dolphinarium in the Netherlands. And the deal was, and the law is, that Morgan should have been rehabilitated to be released. But of course, once they got her, they said, oh, you can't release her now, it's too late. She's being habituated. We can't find her family, sorry. I'll return to that story to tell you what happened in just a minute. At about the same time, this blog, and this is kind of an example of the kind of blogs, but this was where those ex-trainers and some others sort of put their voice out there. Again, no match for the marketing machines of the industry, but for a whole lot of media people, writers, and interested people, and scientists, this was a place to find the real scoop on orchid captivity. And then Tim Zimmerman wrote a feature-length article that was really the history of captivity around the Tillicum kills Don Bradshaw in Orlando incident. And that was the first time that had really been done. I mean, he was extensive with his interviews and his background. And then the boom is lowered. August 2010, OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, cites SeaWorld for willful neglect, for allowing a trainer to get that close to television, allowing any trainers to get close to any whale. And SeaWorld, of course, couldn't stand for that. It was only a $75,000 fine, but it would have stuck, and it would have meant they could no longer put any trainers in the water with whales again. So they had to fight it, and that created a hearing, which went on October and November of last year, that revealed a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of cover-ups, a whole lot more incidents of aggression and injury to trainers that was not in the SeaWorld logs. It had to be dredged up, and some of these ex-trainers had a lot to do with dredging up a lot of that information that they gave to OSHA for their case. And that is still to be resolved. That's in the hands of the judge right now. It could be any time from now till late this year. We may get a judgment on whether that citation will stand. But it's a very strong case, and SeaWorld looked really bad in the media. About this time, these ex-trainers put together this. Orca Tracker as another sort of a depot of information, a source to find it. You can find it yourself. And it just has a lot of videos and interviews and papers and all kinds of information on captivities that sort of put that in one place. These people are energized. They're really working, even though they're ex-trainers, they're working to end the whole practice of captivity. And then another whale dies at SeaWorld, a 12-year-old male sumar. And then another whale dies at SeaWorld, 3 in 1 year, actually 4 if you count the calf being born when Tanina died. All of this feeds into the public's perception and is right in following what the trainers were saying, what a lot of us have been saying for many, many years, that captivity kills orcas. So then in December 2010, the Dolphinarium in the Netherlands says, well, we could never find Morgan's family, so she's going to captivity. They didn't say where at that point, but we all sort of deduced that it was going to be in Laurel Park in Spain. So the Free Morgan Project got underway. Ingrid Visser kind of led the way, and she is another, data-driven, objective, empirical research scientist, field scientist in New Zealand until then. At that point, she everything added up, and she began to realize you just can't put up with this anymore. And she organized a scientific community to come around and do something for Morgan, to try to convince the courts that Morgan could be returned to a sea pen off Norway near where her family comes from. They were matched by localizations. We knew where she came from. And that it could be done. And such luminaries as John Ford, Lance Barrett Leonard, and a whole roster of a couple of dozen very esteemed scientists wrote letters attesting to the fact that she could be released back into the ocean. And yet, the judge decided that it can't be done. And Morgan was sent. Well, I'll get to that. But anyway, and actually playing into that, attempting to sort of add support for Morgan's return and not being kept in captivity, those ex-trainers, 2 of them, Jeff Ventry and John Jett, wrote this paper listing all of these medical problems, most of which we had never heard about before. We speak in generalities and moralities, that you shouldn't have orcas in captivity. But what they did was they looked at the facts. They looked at the damage, the infections, the ulcers, the tooth problems, the skin problems, all kinds of documented facts that they could do. One being a biology professor, the other being a medical doctor. They were able to write this paper. It was very astute. It's not published yet. They're working on a version to submit to a journal to get published. But they put it out in time to try to help Morgan. And this is another blog that was written, one of our sort of co-conspirators, just to try to amplify the voice, to get the whales out of those tanks. And then a movie, which is out now, just came out a year ago or so, Keiko the Untold Story, to clear up these misconceptions about Keiko, about how successful his release was in terms of him climatizing back to his native habitat. He did great. But, it's a little independent movie trying to make its way, in the distribution circuits, and it's really hard to do. So you kind of have to find it, You won't find it on a billboard anymore. Spring of 2011, this came out. This issue of American Cetacean Society. I strongly recommend it to everybody. What this is the field studies that verified that 2001 paper, Culture in Whales and Dolphins. These were the studies, this is 10 years later, around the world, Antarctica, New Zealand, Argentina, Norway, North Pacific, Northeast Pacific, all over the world, finding these cultures, these communities of orchids. Each one is completely distinct. And it's based on the idea that we have a bond with orchids like with no other animal. And really the conclusion, the take-home message, if there's any message to take home from this, I hope it's this. The orchids are members of nomadic foraging tribes. Not like wildlife in general, like we learned in our textbooks. Each one is bonded by cultural traditions that govern every aspect of their lives, passed down through thousands of generations, cohesive and intact over thousands of generations. Their vocalizations, the sounds they make, the diet, their movements, their social discourse, their organization patterns, everything is passed down by tradition, not determined by instincts, stimulus response, conditioning, or anything else. July 2011, Univision, which is far bigger than any English-speaking network, does a 3-part series called Slave Entertainment, all about captivity and orchids. And that's a huge part of the aquariums clientele and SeaWorld. The whole Hispanic community worldwide, North and South America, learned about orchids in captivity from this. This was sort of an outgrowth of this group of conspirators that I was talking about. And then this, a remake of A Fall from Freedom, which describes the captures and all the things that happened. That is available now too. And then Jim Zimmerman wrote another story in Outside Magazine. This it took a year and a half to get the information about Quito killed the trainer in December 24th, 2009, 2 months before Don Show was killed, and revealed the atrocities that go on at that particular place. Candace Whidbey, who is a volunteer at the Center for Whale Research and has a long history with actually working at marine parks doing scientific studies, now has a blog in the Seattle PI that I recommend to anyone. Naomi Rose just finished her second white paper, kind of like the stress paper that Jeff Gentry and John Jett wrote. This one goes through all the evidence why captivity kills orchids. And then the OSHA hearings began, October, November, and our ex-trainers and David Kirby, who is a writer. He's written several big books, investigative reporting on factory farming and autism, and now he, for the last year and a half, has been working on a book called Death at SeaWorld, and he is going to just open it wide open, and that'll be out in June or July of this year. I strongly recommend it. It'll talk about everything I've been talking about, but in great depth, with lots of interviews and lots of illustrious detail. Okay, 5 minutes, I'm going to hurry. PETA has just sued SeaWorld on behalf of 5 captive whales. That's under best friends, next friends, I think is the term. And then another sharp-eyed attorney in D.C. caught this in the language of the ESA listing of the Southern residents, which is that all captives are exempted, so Lolita doesn't count. Even though, I'd say, by the language of the ESA, you can't do that. You can't keep her. You can't capture her as people like that. So they're arguing and suing National Marine Fisheries Service to have her included under the ESA listing. And then both PETA and, you can question a lot of the stunts they pull, but they've got a pretty good legal team, and they're working with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, which is pretty interesting to have these two giants in the sort of the animal welfare, animal rights field, their legal teams working together. And so they are suing NIMS under the ESA. They're the ones pulling this off. And you can see that it is on behalf of Shelby Croy, Carolyn Monroe, and Patricia Sykes, and PETA and ALDF, which is really quite the consortium. And of course, the only captive that remains that this is all about is Lolita. And Shelby Croy, who's out there somewhere, was a bit overjoyed to see that this story made front page news in the Seattle Times with a great big picture, as you can see there. Isn't Facebook wonderful? So this is just to let you know that PETA is really all in, and not the only one. HSUS, ALDF, there's some really big organizations. It's like the cavalry is here. They're coming over the hill. We're getting some help finally to do something about captivity. Here, David did lose her fight for freedom, was sent to Laurel Park, and at last report was not getting along with the other workers there, being harassed. We'll see how that turns out. But the courts and the government just completely ignored the science and listened only to the industries. What happened? And until we got that last report, of course, SeaWorld says nothing but is not doing well. It's been ill, but it's all kind of rumors because it's a fortress and they don't let a lot of information out. So you don't know for sure, but there's sort of a watch on to see how it goes. So, how is all this affecting actual revenues at the gate? Theme park attendance in 2010. SeaWorld Orlando down 12.1%. In San Diego down 9.5%. And the year before, in 2009, Orlando down 6.8%, San Diego down 12%. So that's 2 years of really steep declines. They're saying that 2011 turned around, but I've seen no numbers yet, so that remains to be seen. And of course, they're planning to make up for that with new exhibits, but they're not. They're enhancing, they're beefing up their tanks, putting in more false bottoms and stuff. But their new direction is in penguins and turtles and water slides. Maybe they're sort of getting out of the Shamu business.